11. Elvis Presley today is often fat and always older, but with a single bout of his long, dark eyelashes he can command the adoration of any one of several million women of any age. Women seem to forget they are in the 20th century when Presley comes on stage, and revert to ancient idol worshippers' way of throwing caution and convention to the wind. Whatever it is he has, it triggers a reaction that brings the Neanderthal out in women. Perhaps it is similar to the way Farrah Fawcett, Majors affects men. But back in the days when Elvis was 20 and just about to board a roller coaster that took him on one of the most unbelievable rides in show business history, he certainly was no stud in the modern sense of the word. There were indeed adoring teenagers by the legion, but his natural shyness, and perhaps a belief that it was all just showbiz, told him that it wasn't Elvis Presley they were adoring. It was just the image. He would poke fun at that image, amused at the caricature he presented on stage. Even today, in his calmer moments, he still doesn't take his image too seriously. When he comes on stage wearing some outrageous outfit, he is apt to tell the audience, "Here I am in this Superman outfit." It's an honesty that appeals. And, early on, he held himself pretty much in check. As far as taking advantage of all the females who threw themselves at him, he was, according to Red, more obsessed with making it as a performer for the sake of his mother than running around screwing everything that walked. He believed in his singing. He believed in living a clean life. He cared for his art. He wasn't no sissy when it came to girls, but he wasn't a runaround guy that crawled in and out of everybody's bed, at least in those days. More than anything, success meant saying thanks to his mother to show her that all the hard work and sacrifice weren't in vain. Elvis's devotion to his mother, and her devotion to him constitute perhaps one of the truly great love stories of our time. And, had she lived, the excesses that Presley allowed himself would undoubtedly have been kept to a minimum. It is certainly not beyond imagining that a more disciplined personality might have evolved. Up until he went into the army, Red remembers, he pretty much was only involved with 2 real girlfriends, both Southern, both charming, and both very pretty. One was Dixie Locke and the other girl was a lady named Anita Wood. He never took advantage of who he was. But just around about 1955 to 1956 there was a gradual change. He still had some pretty strict rules when dealing with women. He would never tolerate any of the guys around him cussing in front of ladies, and he would really get turned off if any of his friends went with a married lady or even a divorced lady. Things changed. Of course, he was every mother's dream. He would yes ma'am and no ma'am women half to death. He would always stand up when a woman came into a room. It was very natural at first, but then, says Red, as Elvis got older it became part of his patter. He really developed that professional country boy act with women. In the later years it was no longer natural. It became his line. But where Red noticed a gradual change was toward the end of 1955, and Elvis suddenly found that he was one hell of an attractive guy off stage as well as on. And he started to realize that women liked going to bed just as much as men did. One day in Memphis we were just cruising around in the pink Crown Victoria and we just came across 2 gals. I guess we knew them vaguely. They were more pick-ups than anything else. Red and Presley pulled up alongside the girls and offered to take them for a spin. Homecoming queens they were not. And Red figured that he and his boss would get more than just a spin out of them. In another and earlier time, Presley would very likely have told Red, "I just don't think Mama would expect that of me. I was still living with my mother." Red goes on, "In the Hurt Housing Project, Mama, Lois West, was her name was separated from Dad, and we lived together in the housing project apartment. She worked during the day. Well, that day my mama was at work. So Presley and the girls ended up in Red West's apartment. There were a few awkward preliminaries and then came the pairing off time. Red took one of the girls into his room, and Presley disappeared with his girl into the bedroom of Mrs. Lois West. Now, Red's mother had a painful back condition. The bed was very old, sagging and soft, but Red and his mother couldn't afford to buy a new one. Instead, Red had made the bed more comfortable for his mother's back by putting a large slab of hardwood under the mattress to give it extra firmness. Red and his girl were rolling around on his bed, doing what comes naturally, when suddenly, says Red, I hear this yell, this scream, this breaking sound, and a whole lot of giggling coming from my mother's room. Red hurriedly pulled on his pants and dashed out. Damn, I thought, maybe Elvis was getting into the swing of things and she changed her mind and Elvis was trying to force the issue. Although he was never that kind of guy, I didn't know what to think. Anyway, apparently Elvis had been prosecuting the act of I rush in love with such inspired vigor that he had broken the slab of wood under the mattress. The beautiful moment of ecstasy had been punctuated by the sound of cracking timber. Red chuckles, remembering, it must have been a hell of a shock. Imagine the girl. There she is getting it on and suddenly the whole world collapses under her. I went into the room and there they are half-ass dressed and giggling like school kids in this broken bed. It was pretty funny, but at the time I thought, heck, man, Old Elvis is starting to lose his shyness. Elvis then started to relax a lot more when there were gals around. Like everything. When Elvis does something, he goes all the way. Once he discovered how easy he could get girls, we were routing them through his bedrooms 2 and sometimes 3 a day. That boy sure had a constitution in those early days. It was this newly found appetite of young Presley's that indirectly led to a bristling confrontation between Red and the show, business guru of all time, Colonel Tom Parker. It was also Red's first meeting with the man whom he grew to like and respect over the years as one hell of an old man. 99. It was 1956 and Colonel Parker had been managing Elvis for about a month. I think we were in some place like South Carolina, says Red West. And Elvis had a showing the next night in Virginia. When we played those places back to back, there wasn't much time for fooling around. It was a case of do the show, grab a bite to eat, hit the sack and get moving the next day in the car to the next place. The pace could become very tiring. This particular night, Elvis in his newfound ways with gals picked up this very pretty chick. He took her back to the motel room and shacked up with her. On fine. Now the next morning I get up and start beating his door. I was banging and yelling, "Come on, man. We got to hit the road. We got to get to Virginia." We were already late. Well, whatever that gal was doing, Elvis sure liked her act because he wouldn't get out of the sack with her. When he finally emerged, he looked like he had been mixed up with an egg beater. She really gave him a going over. Well, we're really late now. It's winter time and it's sleeting and raining. Colder than hell. We jump in the car. I drive like a madman through snow and everything to Virginia to this auditorium. I don't know how we weren't killed in the drive. It was madness. Anyway, after a hair-raising drive, we arrive there. I guess we're 15 minutes late, or something like that. Now it's still snowing like hell, but out in front of this auditorium I see this crazy guy in a T-shirt. I get out of the car and I notice he is puffing on this cigar and he has got an expression on his face like he is going to kill me. Now, get it, kill me, not Elvis. Then I notice that, despite the fact he is wearing a T-shirt in this damn snow, he is so worked up he is sweating. Oh, Lord. Without him introducing himself I knew I had met the colonel. He just looks at me as if he was going to rip a yard from my ass. Right away he starts in, "Where in the hell you been? Do you know what time it is? I got these people waiting and you're damn well late. You can't keep people waiting. Who do you think you are, man?" I wanted to dig a hole and dive in. Elvis didn't say a word. He just slipped inside and got dressed. I was scared to go near the colonel all night. It started a trend. When anything went wrong with Elvis, it was always my fault. He would get straight to me. Later on, I learned that him holding me responsible for the star was his way of showing me that he respected me for the responsibility. And man, I got to respect that old boy. With him, it was hard-nosed business all that he worked day and night for Elvis. Together they were like two half-pieces that when they were put together they became a whole. He was a tough businessman, but he lived and breathed his job of promoting his boy, as he used to call him. He made Elvis the fortunes that he got from unbelievable contracts. But as tough as the old boy was, I never knew him once to go back on his word. I have heard all the stories about Colonel Tom, but I know one thing. Once he gave his word and his handshake, he would have rather lost an arm than go back on it. Stories about the cigar-chomping Southern Colonel, Tom Parker, are as countless as stories about Presley himself. But the Colonel apparently chooses to ignore them. He lives quietly with his wife in an immaculate house in Palm Springs, which, the West boys swear, is so clean you could eat a 3-course meal off the driveway. Most days he starts work at 6 in the morning, bellowing deals into a telephone. He has a loyal assistant, Tom Diskin. He has no great turnover of staff. Those who work for him have been doing so, in one capacity or another, since he has been in business. The financial arrangement between him and Elvis is not known, although some say that Colonel Tom owns 50% of the property. Perhaps the reason the Colonel has apparently not taken time to deny some of the more outrageous of the stories about him is that virtually all his time has been spent promoting Elvis Presley. Or it may be simply the instinct of the true promoter. Don't worry about what they say about you, so long as they are saying it, and spelling your name right. Until Tom Parker was 18, he worked at all sorts of odd jobs for his uncle, who at that time ran the Great Parker Pony Circus, which, despite its grandiose name, was as tawdry as most road shows of the 20s. After that he struck out on his own, specializing in catering for the circuses, but doing all sorts of other jobs, even, occasionally, some palm reading. In 1934, the 24-year-old Parker decided to move to the periphery of the circus business. He became a press agent and promoter of sorts, and found he could make a satisfying living. In those days, some of the bigger and better equipped fairs, road shows and carnivals would feature one of the better known names in the country and western field. Young Parker saw an even better way to make a buck in promoting music men, put a coupon advertisement in a newspaper, offering a discount to the purchaser who would take the coupon to a certain department store or supermarket. The store would act as the ticket seller for a particular show and would also be attracting new potential customers to their own business. Sometimes, Parker would even be able to talk the store into paying for the original investment of placing the newspaper coupon ad. He was thus one of the first men in the country to promote a show by tying in a completely separate party. The idea today is a cornerstone of promotion. There wasn't much grass growing under Tom Parker's feet even in those days, and that was in the South at the height of the Depression. Tom Parker's first experience at actually handling a single talent came by way of Gene Austin, who swamped the record market with his hit My Blue Heaven. He promoted a series of concerts for Austin in auditoriums and proved to himself that he had forgotten more about old-fashioned promotion than most veteran promoters had ever learned. It gave him confidence and focused his ambition. Music was, as they would say in a later era, where it said as far as Tom Parker was now concerned. Word of Tom Parker's obsessive work habits and his eye for promotion began to spread. Eddie Arnold, later to become a legend in country music, decided to hire him as an advance agent for one of his tours. Tom Parker saw this as a chance to break into the big time. Before Arnold ever hit a town, there was a plethora of feature articles and stunt pictures lying on the city desk of the local newspaper all ready to go into print. They had been written by a freelance writer by the name of Tom Parker. Handbills, wall posters, newspaper stories, radio interviews, they were all there, waiting for the Arnold entourage to come, see, and conquer. Tom Parker left no area of exploitation untouched. Arnold was so impressed that he finally took him on as his personal manager. It was a move he never regretted. "Tom, why don't you get yourself a hobby?" he once asked Parker. Tom Parker looked at him, dragged heavily on a cigar, and answered, "Eddie, you're my hobby." Through his own talent as much as Eddie Arnold's, Parker was able to bring the great country singer under the wing of RCA Victor. That contact was later to launch Elvis Presley on his skyrocketing career. The Arnold-Parker partnership lasted from 1942 to 1951. Whatever the reason for the split, it is not forthcoming from either Arnold or Colonel Tom. Both men have only the most complimentary things to say about each other. There has always been a place for the big promoter in show business, but in the country music field of the early 1950s, the radio stations of the South and the Grand Ole Opry, mecca of country music, both had their own talent, agency machinery. Parker was able to book a number of acts, but it wasn't until he picked up with Hank Snow in 1954 that his next big break came. Snow, a Canadian, had come to Nashville and the Opry by a long, circuitous route. Although a household name in his native Canada, he was still an unknown in the United States. Colonel Tom changed all that with his old-fashioned hard sell-promoting in the all-important in with RCA Victor. While Hank Snow was selling more than 1 million records of his I Don't Hurt Anymore, Elvis Presley was listening to him on the radio back in Memphis, between stints driving his truck at the Crown Electric Company. Never in his wildest dreams did Presley think he would one day eclipse the master. Right at the end of 1955, Sam Phillips of Sun Records in Memphis was doing a good job in pushing out Presley's releases in the immediate vicinity. But Sam, who also had Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash and Roy Orbison in his stable, thought that maybe Presley was now ready for the big plunge. He went to Randy Wood, head of Dot Records in Los Angeles, with an offer to sell Presley's contract for $7,500, a giant sum in those days. Randy Wood was a good businessman, as was Sam. But he thought that, while Presley might make a few hot discs, he was only a flash in the pan. Besides, explained Wood, he had a new hot property, a crooner who would last forever. His name was Pat Boone. But even as Randy Wood was saying no to Sam Phillips, Oscar Davis was singing Presley's praises to Colonel Tom. Although the Colonel respected Davis's judgment, he didn't make a move until Steve Sholes started to echo Davis's sentiment. Sholes was an old friend of the Colonel's, says Red West. He had been an A&R man for RCA Victor, that is, an artist and repertoire man. He told the Colonel about this here kid who was tearing them up on the Louisiana Herald. The Louisiana Herald operated on much the same basis as the Grand Ole Opry, except that it was performed and broadcast at Shreveport, Louisiana. Colonel Tom went to Shreveport and listened to Presley. The conversion was immediate, and so was his recognition of a vital factor about Presley. He was the only male performer selling what so many female performers sold: sex. Since then, of course, all the top rock stars have got it on the act. But in those days, male singers, but they were never sexy, were romantic, sad, heroic, inspiring, heartbroken. Colonel Tom met Presley and liked him at first glance. He liked the way he reacted to direction. He liked his dedication. And there was an added ingredient, which Colonel Tom was to exploit for all it's worth. While Presley on stage was a writhing mass of sensuality, Off stage he was humble and polite. That contrast would prove to be dynamite. Here was a man, the girls would reason, who was always struggling to control the demon inside him. It was stuff that made millionaires of many people connected with a young truck driver from Memphis. The Colonel, says Red, offered to help Bob Neal push Elvis into areas where Bob didn't know. That old man knew this country like the back of his hand. He had traveled the route with Gene Austin, Eddie Arnold and Hank Snow. It was only a matter of time before the Colonel took over managing Elvis full time. There was no bad blood about the takeover. The Colonel didn't steamroll over Bob. It was by mutual consent. Both those men have the highest regard for each other. Elvis had outgrown Memphis, as far as performing was concerned. Some accounts credit Colonel Tom with getting Presley his first big break by putting him on Louisiana Hayride, although he hadn't seen him until he first went to Shreveport. When questioned about that particular part of Presley's career, the Colonel is likely to give that belly shaking chuckle for which he is well known among his associates, and say, "Boy, I got him off the Louisiana Hayride." When Presley told the Colonel how he and the Blue Moon Boys had got the thumbs down treatment from the Arthur Godfrey Show audition team, the Colonel looked him in the eye and, in a voice that instilled instant confidence in the young man, said, "Boy, we'll have New York for you for money you can't believe." If anyone around Presley thought it was an idle boast, they were very soon to change their minds. Not 3 months after Randy would refuse the chance to buy Presley's contract for $7,500, the Colonel's close contacts with RCA Victor paid off. He sold Presley's recording contract for $35,000, an unprecedented amount in those days. Now, just around this time, and maybe it was before he actually got the RCA contract, says Red, Elvis was still on road shows. He was in a bigger bracket, of course, and there were times when he appeared on the same show as Johnny Cash and Hank Snow. Now, on those shows they worked the sequence in which they would go on. Depending on the mixture of the act, the star attraction would normally go on last. Whenever Elvis was on with Hank Snow, Hank always insisted on going on last. It wasn't an ego thing. It was just that he was the star attraction. One night, I think it was in Alabama, there was a big show, a really big one, when all the top country music stars were there, and Elvis was to go before Hank. Well, Elvis just tripped that audience apart. Now Hank followed, and did a great show, but as far as the audience was concerned it was a letdown after Elvis. Hank went to the MC and, like the real gentleman he was, just said, "From now on, you better put me on before the boy." That was an acknowledgement from one of the all-time greats that Elvis was the star. That's how those country boys were. No jealousy, nothing. You wouldn't hear of something like that happening in show business today. The first disc Elvis Presley cut with RCA Victor was a number that sounded as if he were singing in an empty room, a long tunnel, an echo chamber. It sounded strange to uninitiated ears. It was called Heartbreak Hotel, and in record time it was a million seller. RCA then released 4 Presley numbers, all million sellers. He went on to record I Want You, I Need You, I Love You, again a million seller. The record industry was reeling. Where had this kid come from? The teenage market went berserk, and so did their parents. In 1956 Elvis Presley, by that stroke of Parker mastery, was crowned king. Sonny West, who traveled with Colonel Tom and got closer to him than any of the other Memphis Mafia, relates, "That's why all those stories about him and his early days sound like rubbish to me. He was a tough, hard, working guy who had genius and old-fashioned horse sense." 99. In later years there were times when Presley would happily have got rid of Colonel Tom Parker, but, as Sonny observes, without Colonel Tom there would never be an Elvis Presley. They are both part of a whole. When RCA Victor bought Presley's contract for the fabulous $35,000, they generously threw in a $5,000 bonus for the young singer. The first thing he did was go out and spend it all on a pink Cadillac for his mother. It was almost as if he'd had a premonition that she would not be with him much longer.